once it was started being released. Published from December of 2011 to July of 2002 for 3 issues, the series received mixed to negative reviews, with many considering it nowhere near the brilliance of the original Dark Knight Returns comic. Despite this reception, the series was still a financial success, with each issue selling at least 170,000 copies apiece. Miller still wasn't done with Batman, as he would return to the character once again with All-Star Batman and Robin, The Boy Wonder, in 2005, with Jim Lee as the artist. According to Miller, it was set in the continuity of The Dark Knight Returns and covers this version of Batman recruiting Dick Grayson to become Robin, though in a near-criminal manner as he kidnaps and is even physically abusive toward Robin. It is also the comic that Batman utters the now infamous line, "I'm the GD Batman," that quickly became a joke among fans. While initial sales was strong, with the first issue selling 200,000 copies, critical and fan reaction, along with the erratic release schedule, 11 issues were released from 2005 to 2008, led to the comic being negatively viewed. Jim Lee would always claim the late releases were his fault, as Miller had completed his scripts, but Lee was just too busy with other duties at DC at the time. Around the same time, Frank Miller would also divorce his wife and longtime colorist Lynn Varley. Despite these disappointments, in both his professional and personal life, Frank Miller would return to Hollywood after much convincing from director of From Dusk Till Dawn, Robert Rodriguez. Rodriguez was a huge fan of Sin City and wanted to make an adaptation of it, but Miller was reluctant from his previous experience with Hollywood, especially since that comic was his direct reaction to his problems with the industry. However, when Rodriguez made a short film of the story The Customer is Always Right, starring Josh Hartnett and Marley Shelton, and showed it to Miller, he was pleased and even agreed to co-direct the film with Robert Rodriguez, which forced Rodriguez to leave the Directors Guild of America when they refused. For some weird reason, both him and Miller can't have co-directing credit. Using the comic book as storyboards for the film, it not only incorporated the original short, but also The Hard Goodbye, The Big Fat Kill, and That Yellow Bastard into a sprawling film connecting all the stories, also just like the comic. Miller was surprised at Rodriguez's insistence that they shoot the whole comic. He would joke to Miller, "Sorry, Frank, you drew it, so we shoot it." But loved working with the actors, and as it was an all-star cast that consisted of Mickey Rourke, who would make his comeback with this role, Bruce Willis, and Clive Owen, who reportedly approached Miller over his love of Raymond Chandler, which inspired him thoroughly. To also capture the look of the comic, Rodriguez used extensive green screen that not only kept the cost down, the film was shot for $40 million over 45 days, but allowed the actors to not even be on the same set on the same day to act together. Miller would also throw a fun jab at his past work in RoboCops 2 and 3, when RoboCop's gun makes a brief cameo in the film. Released on April 1st of 2005, it was met with instant critical acclaim for its faithfulness to the comic, along with financial success, grossing $158.8 million worldwide. And it also revived Frank Miller's interest in Hollywood, and for better or worse, he decided to make a try at directing a movie by himself. In 2008, The Spirit was released on Christmas Day, adapting the classic Will Eisner comic for the big screen using the same film techniques from Sin City, which Frank Miller directed. Miller was a longtime fan of the character and his creator, comic book legend Will Eisner, and even in a book with him, Eisner Miller, in 2005, in which the two interviewed each other. Starring Gabriel Macht as the title character and Samuel L. Jackson as his archenemy, the Octopus, the film readapts his origin, giving him superhuman regenerative abilities. In the original comic book, the Spirit just faked his death. Despite an all-star cast also included Scarlett Johansson and Eva Mendes, the film was a financial and critical failure, grossing us $39 million against a $60 million budget. Frank Miller joked before the movie was released that the Spirit's creator, the late Will Eisner, wouldn't have liked the film, and probably even more so now. With the film's failure, it also ended Miller's plans to adapt the Buck Rogers into a movie, which was also shunted, and pretty much ended Frank Miller's directorial career. Still affected by the events of 9/11, Frank Miller proposed a Batman vs. Al-Qaeda comic called Holy Terror Batman, though DC shut that down in 2006. Miller continued to work on the project and by 2010 said it would be an original tale, this time having a superhero called the Fixer taking on Islamic terrorists after an attack on Empire City. Published on September 8, 2011, it will receive instant criticism for its critiques of Islam, with notable critics being Stan Lee and Grant Morrison, who attacked the story for simplifying the conflict with terrorism. Miller originally defended his book and also comments against the Occupy Wall Street, who he called a bunch of rapists and thieves, by pointing out, "We were at war with a dangerous enemy." However, by 2018, Miller would back away from both Holy Terror and those comments, stating that they came from a place of anger over 9/11, and while he can't remove chapters from his life, he was no longer capable of making something like Holy Terror ever again. Frank Miller will return to Sin City to the movies again with a sequel called The Sin City, A Dame to Kill For, which adapted the Dame to Kill For story along with the continuing stories from the first film. Both Miller and Rodriguez returned to directing, along with most of the original cast, but the film, released on April 22, 2014, was met with mixed reviews and disappointing box office, grossing $39.4 million against a $65 million budget. Returning to comic books in 2015, Frank Miller made a third edition of the Dark Knight Returns story with The Dark Knight 3, The Master Race, which finds Batman and the other DC superheroes battling an invasion of Kryptonians. Miller wasn't alone in this comic, however, with Brian Azzarello joining him on writing duties, while Andy Kubert and Klaus Johnson helped with the art. Frank Miller also produced a series of one-shots he wrote and drew highlighting the different DC characters along with filling in the events between issues, as the series was meant to be bi-monthly. Released from November of 2015 to June of 2017, the 9-issue miniseries would be an instant hit, selling 440,234 copies on the first issue alone, along with receiving better reviews than the previous Dark Knight Strikes Back. Nevertheless, it was not considered the classic that Dark Knight Returns is, but it revived Miller's interest in doing a fourth miniseries, which is yet to be produced. On June 10th of 2015, Frank Miller was inducted into the Will Eisner Hall of Fame and followed the completion of The Master Race. Frank Miller returned to work full-time as a writer-artist on Xerxes, The Fall of the House of Darius and The Rise of Alexander, where it served as both a sequel and a prequel to his 300 miniseries. Published from April to August of 2018, the 5-issue miniseries follows Xerxes' rise as the Emperor of Persia, his invasion of Greece, and the eventual fall of Persia when Alexander the Great invades. Currently, Frank Miller is working on Superman Year One for DC under his Black Label, a prestige format comic that tells the origin of Superman of the Dark Knight Returns universe. He also provided art for Tom Wheeler's Cursed young adult novel, which tells the story of King Arthur from the perspective of the Lady of the Lake, which was picked up for a series for Netflix in 2018. The book was published in 2019, with the series supposed to be debuting in 2020. While Frank Miller has yet to recapture the heights of his work in the 1980s and 90s, he remains a viable creator still, and while his overall legacy cannot be denied. While many miss the point of his gritty adult stories in the works like Daredevil and The Dark Knight Returns, Miller remains one of the most important comic artists in recent decades, reviving not only Batman and Daredevil, but crime comic books and historical epics, reviving genres long neglected by the American comic book medium. There is only one Frank Miller, and the comic books are much better for him today. I would like to thank the chief source of these episodes, the Comics Journal Library, Frank Miller Interviews 1981 to 2003, which is a collection of the interviews that Frank Miller gave to the journal at the time. A great read for anyone wanting to look into the mind of Frank Miller. And now is December 26th, 2019, and normally this will be where I give my favorite comic book of the week. But, with yesterday being Christmas, which is New Comic Book Day, there were no new comic books coming out. Everyone else needs to take Christmas off. However, I would say I had a great Christmas, and comic book related. I did get from Santa Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck by Don Russo, and also the first volume of Genius Isolated, The Life of Alex Toth, both of who will be hopefully future subjects for episodes coming up. And the only other thing, geek-related, was I did finally catch Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker yesterday. As a Christmas tradition, I always have to catch a movie when it comes out. And I have to say, I do like it better than First Jedi, though I felt that it's a bit too long and too many subplots and new characters and so forth like this, and especially when you compare it to the original trilogy, which is still the benchmark of the greatest sci-fi fantasy trilogy of all time. You realize there wasn't as much there. While there's great action, there's a lot of action in that movie. The action is used perfectly and sparingly, and whereas this one's like they're going to planet, action scene after action scene, and could have been trimmed down a little bit. Well, however, nevertheless, Daisy Ridley as Rey and Adam Driver as Kylo Ren give great performances, solid action, and definitely worth seeing. It's my second favorite of the trilogy. Force Awakens is still my favorite, and of the modern Star Wars films, Rogue One is easily the best of all those Star Wars films. But of course, the original trilogy is the best of all time. Notably, Empire Strikes Back, still my favorite movie of all time. With that, I hope everyone had a great Christmas, like I did. And join me again next week when, well, we'll see if my comic book store will be open. After all, it falls on New Year's Day, the same with some new comic books day. It might be a lot. If so, I will have a new comic review. But until then, hope you got some great comic books from Santa and go out and enjoy them.